Hello, welcome to another Seeds of Flourishing episode. So in today's episode, I'm going to talk a little bit about a new project that I'm going to start up, I think, leading into next year, into 2023. But in the process of just talking a little bit around that and seeing, if anybody watching this video is interested in, that as a potential seed of flourishing for their own philosophical investigations, I thought I would sort of join up the dots a little bit causally in terms of my own exposure to philosophy and my own pathway, if you like, through the study of philosophy. Now, obviously, I'm summarizing and compressing like crazy here because it's a bit of a lifelong passion of mine that, interestingly, hasn't really borne any academic fruits. It's not really an area that I've attempted to do anything beyond the odd short course here and there. It's not like other areas that I've studied where, I've taken full-blown 2-3 year long programs, albeit most of them part-time to fit around work, but have some degree of long-term academic rigor to them. So it's an area that very much, I suppose, is a hobby, but it is a fairly deep hobby and a fairly serious hobby in terms of the amount of time that I spend on it and the depth that I go to. So I wanted to talk around a little bit, as to this new project in the area of consciousness studies and how I sort of got there, because part of these Seeds of Flourishing videos, the reasons why I do them, is I like to reflect on my own sort of journey sometimes through a particular subject or focus that I'm talking about. And this is a good example of that. This is what this video is going to be about. So currently, I suppose my long-term philosophy project is I've been working through this DK book probably for the last 2 years. I've had it longer than that, but I've been seriously engaging it for that period of time. Now, as I was putting this episode together and just deciding what I was going to talk about, I thought it might be just interesting for me to explain or relate to what was my sort of very first, what I consider to be philosophical experience. And the philosophical experience is very clear in my head, although the time, I can remember where I was. It's one of those vivid recollections. I just have trouble discerning how old I was at the time. I know I wasn't at secondary school, so I know it was before the age of 11, and it may have been earlier than that. I might pinpoint it around 7 or 8, maybe. And I remember where I was actually walking to school. And I was on my own, and I was, as I often do and still do now, I was sort of, just wondering at nature. I've always been very engaged in the outside world and the wonder of the natural world and the universe. And I was having this existential reflection. It wasn't really a crisis, it was just a reflection. As I was reflecting on what one would call the subjective experience, although I wouldn't have known what that was at that age probably. And I remember thinking, why am I looking out on this universe from this position at this point in time. And that really fascinated me, but didn't scare me. And I had all sorts of thoughts about why wasn't I looking out of more people? Why was it just me looking out from here? And clearly there were other people looking out as well. And were they having the same thought, or had they had the same thought? And it's probably that nurtured my interest in, or the seeds of flourishing for philosophy. And so moving forward to where I currently am, so I'm going to be jumping around a little bit. This is where I am at this moment. So I'm actually getting close to the end of this book. What I was doing is I was doing a philosopher a week. So it would basically consist of me, I'd normally allocate a day of the week to do this, and it expands over the week. So I'd go in, and on a Tuesday, say, I would pick the next philosopher on where I got to. So it was one philosopher a week. If you're not familiar with this book, how it lays it out is there's either one page or I think up to about 5 pages, depending on the philosopher. And they have a quote that is attributed in some way, either directly or indirectly, to that philosopher. And then they'll have an exploration of that particular thing. Now you can see with these examples, I've picked this for a reason rather than bring up my Kindle version. I have several versions of this. So I've got mainly a Kindle and a hardback copy. But what you'll find is for different philosophers, it may be one page, it may be multiple pages, but it will feature, this sort of DK look to it. So you might have these sort of call out sections and various diagrams in some instances, and in others it might just be a page of writing. But one thing they always do is they always have this in context box on them. So if this was a single page here, you just have the in context and then some blurb, and then at the top here it will be the name of the philosopher and the quote as well. And then some are like this, where you've got this, some pages where you have, in a lead into that, you've got the quote printed large like this, and then some sort of large icon type diagram. And it's a very engaging book. And so on a Tuesday, I'll read through, I'll make some notes around it, and then I'll think about that for the rest of the day. And that might spill over into other days. And initially it was my intent to maybe read a philosophical work from where that comes from. And I did try that, but it was a bit too deep for the period of time that I could allocate. But generally, if I can, I normally listen to at least one podcast as well. And my go-to is one I've mentioned before, which is In Our Time. And so this is where I am now, but I've doubled down a bit on, because I'm getting near the end of the book, I've worked out that if I do 2 philosophers a week, then what I can do is finish the book by the end of the year, which means that's going to free me up for another Thursday philosophy project, if you like. And I've decided the project's going to be consciousness studies. And I'm going to now go back in time and show you how I've gone from that. In some ways, I suppose I've come full circle from that initial thought about the subjective experience through to currently just methodically going through a book on philosophy, joining the dots. So let's just take it back a little bit. So probably my first serious engagement in philosophy in terms of just reading a book that would point me in various directions was this one. This is the Made Simple book. This was probably sometime in the 80s. I have a copy of this, and I have the revised second edition, so it probably gives me some clue. I think actually this is a facsimile that's identical to my copy. So yeah, round about somewhere in 86, I started to read through this. Now, there is a newer version of this which I actually purchased on Kindle, so they've updated it. This version, you'll notice it's the same authors. I've looked through, obviously, and I started rereading this actually the other day. So I don't know how easy that is to see there. Probably not very easy. I'm not too concerned about the date. I wondered if there was a date up the top there. But what I did discover is the layout is super similar. And so this was, I suppose, my gateway drug into philosophy. And from that, and through reading the book, or the original one, if you like, through this one, I started to read some Penguin classics. So these are the modern equivalent of those, but the layout's very similar. So, I would be reading, I've got a copy of actually this, The Last Days of Plato, where part of it does discuss, I think it's in the Phaedro, in the fourth book. This is a collection of 4 books surrounding as it says, the last days of Socrates. And there's a discussion in book 4 of the sort of nature of mind, if you like. So sort of analysis of the philosophy of mind, as Socrates, is effectively reflecting on his imminent demise. But there's a number of other books that are Penguin classics that are concerned with philosophy that I read as a result of that Made Simple book. From there, I then progressed on to a number of Routledge classics, which I probably discovered sometime more into the 2000s. So a lot of this stuff kept me occupied in the 80s and 90s, and then 2000s I progressed on to slightly heavier books. And I've talked about the Routledge classics before, and within them there are a subset of philosophy books that are very interesting reading. There's also Bertrand Russell's History of Philosophy, which of course now by today's standards is rather out of date and very much Bertrand Russell, but I did enjoy reading it. Now, one thing I never did with philosophy is I never took a formal course until I moved to Nova Scotia, and sometime in the 2010s I'm jumping forward a bit, sorry. So at sometime in the 2000s, towards the end of the 2000s, I started to get a bit more interested in the philosophy of mind, and found this book by Susan Blackmore. Now it's interesting because it's more a book in some ways about consciousness studies, and one of the areas it looks at is philosophy of mind, but it spreads out as well and looks at things like meditation and certain aspects to do with the sciences beyond just philosophy. I have an earlier copy of this. This will be the 3rd edition. So mine has slightly different cover to it. But it was a very enjoyable read, and through that book, made me read other texts as well. through there. There's some nice, I wouldn't really call them reading assignments, but because it's a textbook, at the end of each chapter there's some recommended readings as well to do with the philosophy of mind. Then in the 2010s, after I moved to Nova Scotia, I decided now was the time to take a course. So University of Oxford run these online courses. There's loads of them now. I think at the time when I did one of these, there was probably only about 5, maybe 6 philosophy courses. There's a whole load now. And this was really good, actually. This was nice to have a series of study that was assessed at the end of it. And there was also continual assessment through it. And it worked in a really neat way in that it worked through the various philosophical approaches, or what's the best way to say this? So it focused specifically on the mind-body problem. And then through examining classical and contemporary works, showed how over the ages philosophers had wrestled with the problem of the mind-body, and in effect moved forward in some way. So in thinking about the mind-body problem through a particular lens, you start to notice maybe anomalies, things that don't quite line up, to the point at which, if you get enough of those anomalies, you start to think, well, maybe this theory isn't robust enough, so you move on to another. And the program was nicely structured, so you sort of went through roughly, and it wasn't exactly, I don't think, necessarily in historical order, but it was logically ordered so that each one made sense, because generally as you worked and wrestled with one, you started to notice anomalies, and those anomalies fitted nicely in with the next theory and so on. Now, in order to do the course, I did have to purchase this, which at the time was a reasonably expensive book. It was about $100, I think. Although I had a rather convenient monetary gift from my employees for being at the firm a certain number of years, which coincided with studying this course. So I leveraged that, book voucher or whatever it was at the time, to pay for the book on Amazon. The course is, to me, seems, from compared to other short courses that I'd done with the Open University back in the day, relatively pricey. This is in UK pounds. At the time it was about £250, which worked out at about somewhere out of 500 Canadian dollars, which is quite a bit of money for a short course compared to what I'd paid previously with the Open University. Of course, now most online courses are much more expensive than they were, say, pre the whole MOOCs thing. I mean, obviously there's a number of courses that are free through massive online courses, massive open online courses. But I have noticed in the last 10 years that the cost of courses has slowly been ratcheting up. This is the particular book, again, slightly different cover. Mine's the blue one. This is a newer copy of this. And we used it in combination with some course notes that we were given as well. And we had a course tutor who we could converse with, and there was also rather a handy discussion forum as well. So yeah, I really enjoyed the course, and it definitely solidified some philosophy of mind stuff I had. So to try and join this all up now. So what's happened is, of course, I realise that I'm getting to the end of my current philosophy studies, and I want to do something new. And I've decided I want to do something new in philosophy of mind, but try not to repeat myself, because I was thinking, well, I could go back, go through the DK book, find all the philosophers that are under that banner, under philosophy of mind / consciousness studies, and read their classic texts, and that is a possibility. So I could go back to Descartes, I could go back to Locke or Hume or Kant or whoever, or back to Plato, and indeed I've dug out my copy of The Last Days of Plato to read that, the fourth book about around his death, the one that deals with aspects of consciousness and the philosophy of mind. But just before I did that, I started going online and looking to see, and often what you find is when you what's the word I'm looking for really? You realign yourself after a series of studies with a point from which you want to work. You discover these authors now who you are a bit oblivious to, because of course you've been in a slightly different bubble for a while. And in the course of just Googling a few things, I discovered this person, Anil Seth, mainly through listening to some podcasts. And I'm going to include a link to everything I'm talking about. But the cool thing about this, which I just dug up this morning, I didn't originally go through this. I went through a podcast and sort of worked backwards, is that it actually has links to all the podcasts and more that I've listened to. So this is a much better point of reference. Originally I was going to include links to the podcast, but this is much better. I've also started reading his book, This Being You book. Well, actually, as I start reading, I've leveraged library services here, and I'm able to listen to the audio book through Libby, which is really useful. Another interesting connection to this guy is that he actually operates out of the University of Brighton. University of Brighton, Sussex University. You have to be careful there because it's two different things, possibly. Sussex University, which is down near Brighton. And I used to go past there all the time, like when I was going to Brighton Technical College, when I was going to gigs, when I visit Brighton, if I ever visit Brighton, it's on the main way in to Brighton, so you can't really miss the campus. And I've actually been down to the campus one time to meet with some, in one of the business units, a friend of mine was embarking on a new business project, and they wanted me to go down as like an individual advisor, sort of acting with them on their behalf when we were chatting to some people that work for the business the business group down there, whatever it's called. I can't remember which specific one. It was probably about 15, 16 years ago, and it didn't really go anywhere. But so I have actually been down to the campus there as well. But I've not met anybody in this particular area of study. So I was, looking around this, but what I was doing, I wanted to find something that would fit consciousness studies into some nice philosophical buckets. And this morning, which is what really stimulated or was the reason for putting this little episode together, was I discovered this paper, and I will include a link to this. It's free to download, and I think it's super cool if you're coming to consciousness studies from a philosophical framework, because what it does is it tries to map consciousness studies into these five fundamental categories, and uses a series of questions to do that. And the fundamental categories, as you can see, are definitional, phenomenological, epistemological, ontological, and axiological. There's a bit of a mouthful. Now, these ones I was aware of. Axiological is a term I'd not become aware of before, so that's cool. And then under each category, apart from the definitional, it has more questions. And it's interesting from a philosophical standpoint, because one of the definitions when I think about philosophy that springs to mind is, and this is one of many definitions of philosophy, is the art of, I don't know if this quote is right, but it's basically the process of asking better questions about something. So meta-questioning, I suppose, if you want to think of it that way. But there was this really neat diagram in here. And this is extended out better in the PDF. So this is obviously compressed for internet use. If you click on here, it'll drill down. And you can see here, so the definitional question is, how should we determine the term consciousness and its cognates? Phenomenological question. What phenomenological features does consciousness have? I didn't say that any of these words would be easy to say. So. And then under that we've got a content question, a dimensional question, and a structure question. So this is the sort of thing I was after. So what I can do is I can work through this and use this as my basic framework, and then go, okay, who do I need to read that might help me understand this? So what I might do is, as I work through this, is just think about the question myself, and then maybe write down some stuff, and then go away and see if I can find an author or a paper or a book or whatever that explores this question. And then from that, I'll probably have additional questions. So I thought it was a nice, neat set of buckets, or nice framework, however you want to think of it, of thinking about, or exploring, should I say, consciousness studies. And obviously, and the reason why I wanted to do that is because with consciousness studies, you're not just talking about philosophy. You know, it flip-flops between a lot of different things. And if you sort of start to drill down through this, you'll realize that the particular unit, if you like, or I'm trying to think of the right word for this, but the research group that operates out of Sussex University is multidisciplinarian. So yeah, that was also that something was back in my mind is I needed to find a way of managing this, so that if I'm coming in from a philosophical angle, but I want to introduce multidisciplinarian aspects to that, where's a good way to build those branches? And I think that this paper is really going to do that for me. So that's probably all I want to talk about in this video. It's probably quite long now, but I thought it was just interesting for me, and for hopefully anybody else that's interested in thinking about philosophy of mind and consciousness studies, as different approaches that just allow you to get a handle on this and allow you to establish some sort of path through this particular focus of interest, if you like. So thanks once again for watching. Bye for now, and I will catch you in the next video.